Hey guys, Wyatt Claypool here. You may have not been fully aware of the Liberal government attempting to ban gas powered cars by the year 2035. I guess you'd be able to keep any gas powered vehicles that you had prior to that date, but you wouldn't be able to purchase them after that. It sounds hyperbolic, like something their opposition would have just made up based on a very skewed reading of some of their policies, but this is something that you can literally find on the Liberal Party's website. Check this out: a cleaner, greener future for everyone. 100% zero emissions car sales by 2035. Almost a quarter of our emissions come from the transportation sector, and half of these emissions come from cars and trucks that get Canadians around every day. It's almost like that last little bit of that sentence, that get Canadians around every day, is very key here. Maybe don't screw with something that people need to survive. They need to be able to get around in an efficient manner. Maybe let's not mess with that. But they go on to say, we know action is needed to reduce pollution from transportation. That's why we've launched the ZEV program in 2019 to provide purchase rebates up to $5,000 to Canadians who want to get behind the wheel of an electric vehicle. This is also why I'm highly skeptical of the actual profitability of the EV industry. That includes all like Stellantis, Tesla, all the car companies that are starting to roll out pure EV lines. How much is it that people actually really like the cars? And I know people who really do like the cars, but how much of it is the fact there's a subsidy available, so you're willing to drive the car because you got $5,000 back that you wouldn't have gotten on a gas-powered vehicle? Even if you may even prefer a gas-powered vehicle, but you live in an urban area and it's no skin off your nose. It's just whoever gets you the better deal, and maybe getting $5,000 off is the better deal. But we don't need to look at the Liberal website anymore. Now I just want to jump over to what's being said in the House of Commons, because the Conservatives have seized on this issue. This is going to be a big thing for them. And I think it is a good issue because the Liberals do not seem to be willing to back off it right now. Carney, in effect, has recommitted to it. Obviously, he did. He ran on it. But even with the Conservatives' recent push, they are not backing off.
The opposition. You don't have to allow Canadians to buy one type of vehicle by banning their ability to buy the ones that they actually want. But, this is raising a lot of questions. Canadians, auto workers, Ford, GM, they all don't want the EV mandate, but the Prime Minister is intent on pushing it through. Why? Well, right before becoming Prime Minister, he was chair of Brookfield, and he advocated for a ban on gas-powered cars. Brookfield is heavily invested in the EV supply chain, yet this Prime Minister refuses to reveal his financial interests or self-admitted conflicts. Isn't it true that this isn't about the environment, this is about the bottom line for Brookfield?
Now, honestly, I believe most of the reason behind this proposed ban is ideological. I think it just happens to coincide with a lot of other interests Carney may have as to why he is more committed to this than a normal Liberal policy, but they were in favor of this well before Carney ever came around.
The Honourable Minister for Artificial Intelligence.
We're in a trade war launched by the United States.
Oh my goodness, why would you have Evan Solomon get up and answer this question? He's in a fake ministry about artificial intelligence.
Artificial intelligence.
We're in a trade war launched by the United States that's targeting our auto workers and our auto sector. Make no mistake, we will fight for every job and every worker. We have invested in the auto sector, including the EV sector, to build good jobs in places like St. Thomas, where the Amino Corp is employing people. This government will always invest in workers and make sure that the auto industry is growing, resilient, and successful.
You think as a former TV producer, TV like show host, Evan Solomon would be a little more steady than that. But how absurd is it to go out there and, in response to the fact that your party ran on and is going to try and implement a gas-powered car ban by the year 2035, that you get up and say, we've been very supportive of the auto sector? Have you? Because you're proposing getting rid of most of the auto sector in Canada in favor of the EV sector, which only survives because of massive direct subsidies to the companies, as well as indirect subsidies through tax rebates for people purchasing the vehicles. This is absolutely just contradictory, but it's the space the liberal government lives in. Now, the sad thing is that I don't think a lot of people are going to be made aware of this contradiction. Again, the liberal media is going to cover what they want, and they can downplay the story. They naturally have to kind of cover it a little bit, but not in the thorough way that we kind of need in order for people to understand that these people pretending to protect our economy from the United States are also placing bets against it. And by the way, you want to save the auto sector? Cut taxes, cut regulations, make it easier to produce cars. The only reason many sectors in Canada beg for subsidies is because they realize that begging for tax cuts wasn't working. So maybe the government will give them cash after taxing them, rather than the other way around, because the liberals are ideologically big government. And so they don't want to back off of the high tax rates, because that's part of their marketing, that we are hard on like the billionaires and millionaires and whatnot. Not to the extent like the NDP are, but they very much try and run anti-corporate, even though you could say it's one of the most corporate parties on the planet. The large corporations do very well under the liberals, not as well as they would do under conservatives, but large corporations actually are able to outcompete smaller businesses because of the sheer amount of regulations and taxes. It's this kind of backwards way where the liberals, by opening fire on all industry, end up benefiting the large corporations in the long run, because their smaller competition can't hack it the way their larger competition can. And so they end up going bankrupt, and the large ones end up consuming the small ones. But here is Glenn Mott saying, the Liberals still plan to ban gas-powered vehicles by 2035, forcing you to buy electric. And so what the Conservatives did really smartly here is that the Liberals can pretend, oh, no, you guys are panicking. That's, we're wanting more Canadians to have any options they want on what vehicles they want to drive. But, the world's moving towards, EVs, and by 2035, we will naturally be there from, the moves in the market. You'll get a lot of people saying that, especially liberal defenders in the media. They'll say this is already where the world's going. Whether we mandate a ban or not, gas-powered vehicles are going away. So the Conservatives put it to a vote. So Glenn Motz goes on to say, Conservatives tried to stop the ban, but the Liberals, NDP, and Bloc voted down our motion. These parties just voted to raise car prices, send Canadians auto jobs to the US, and limit our freedom to choose. Canadians deserve better. And I like the freedom to choose element here. I think, and it's an old Milton Friedman documentary title, Freedom to Choose, they should run on, it was like a series on television, Freedom to Choose. The Conservatives should run on a big vision that they should just steal the name from Milton Friedman. Just call it Freedom to Choose. That is what the Conservatives are running on for their economic agenda. So this vote went down 141 yay to 194 nay. And when he went through it, it was basically Conservatives voted yay, and then Liberals and everyone else voted nay. With the Liberals, there was a few people who didn't vote, but it's because they have the system where if one person's on vacation from one side, someone else will go on vacation from the other side to keep it balanced. But yeah, that was telling, and that is something that the Conservatives are going to be able to hit the Liberals on in the long run. And then I just want to highlight another thing, and that is the NDP's insane position on this particular piece of legislation. So we had the NDP needing to outdo the Liberals, had to stand up and make their own insane demand on environmental policy.
I'm honored to rise today to introduce the National Renewable Energy Strategy Act. I thank my colleague from Rosemont La Petite Patrie for seconding this legislation and all his work to protect our environment. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has been clear that we must cut global greenhouse gas emissions in half by 2030 and reach net zero by 2050 to avert catastrophic global climate change.
Sorry, why is catastrophic things not happening now while we're producing a lot of emissions? Why do we have to be at net zero to avoid them? Wouldn't we just need to be less? Or even if we went to the emissions levels of the 1930s, that would still be too much. This is always the thing. It's always this maximalist position that it has to be all or nothing. That, either we do nothing or we go to net zero. It's frankly ridiculous.
The time for action is now. That means implementing solutions for clean energy and transitioning away from fossil fuels. While we do this, we must ensure that workers are not left behind. Jobs in Canada's clean energy sector are projected to grow by nearly 50% by 2030.
Let me guess, are subsidies going to be going up by about that much? Because that's the only reason that the green energy sector is growing, is because subsidies are growing.
And the industry's GDP contribution is on track to reach $100 billion by the end of this decade. This legislation would accelerate our transition to a clean energy future by requiring that the Minister of Natural Resources develop and implement a national strategy to ensure 100% of electricity generated in Canada comes from renewable energy sources by 2030.
Do you know what the problem with this is? And it's the same problem with the EV mandate. Both of them are bad. Actually, before I get to that, I do want to just highlight another conservative speaking out on this, just so you can kind of see like the fulsome amount of voices. Here's one of my favorite MPs, Arnold Viersen, speaking out against it, an MP who represents a rural Alberta riding, and I think that is very relevant to this topic.
Mr. Speaker, it's never been more difficult for V8 truck owners in this country. After years of Liberal mismanagement, they've created hardships for farmers, families, and forestry workers in northern Alberta. Now this Liberal government plans to ban gas-powered vehicles and force Canadians to drive electric vehicles. Just one more example of Ottawa knows best. Well, Mr. Speaker, let me tell you what Albertans and rural Canadians know. The farmer hauling his livestock can't wait for hours to recharge during a trip. The hunter who needs to bring home his moose can't stick it in the back of a Prius. And when it's minus 40 out, oil and gas workers can't rely on EVs to haul heavy equipment needed to keep the heat on for the rest of the country. Even in Quebec, Mr. Speaker, the #1 selling vehicle is the gas-powered F-Series pickup.
I do like how he had to say even in Quebec because of the reputation, but yeah.
In a strong and free Canada, Canadians must have the choice to drive a vehicle that meets their needs at a price that they can afford. It's time to axe the ban on electric-powered vehicles, or gas-powered vehicles.
Now I just want to quickly jump over now to a statement that someone I like in the media made, one opinion commentator writer, whatever he would just classify himself as. But I think Tristan Hoper had a very good perspective on this that sums up what I think quite well too. Tristan Hoper from the National Post says, "The singular thing turning me against EVs is that they will be dependent on an increasingly overloaded grid that will not under any circumstances be able to power an electrified Canadian vehicle fleet. If you want commuting to be as broken as accessing healthcare, buy an EV." And I like how he's taken this on not from the perspective that it's turned him against an EV ban or a gas-powered ban. This is why EVs are bad in general. And I would agree. We were experiencing a couple of years ago in Alberta in 2023, we almost had the grid fail in Calgary multiple times because when we transitioned away from coal, which is actually a problem, a mistake by the UCP, the NDP started the coal phase out in 2015 or 2016, and then the UCP kept it going. I think they should have scrapped that. When we transitioned away from coal, we started investing more in solar and wind. And so when those failed, when it's -40 outside, we were left without coal and without green energy, and now we had to rely on natural gas, trying to actually, power the entire grid. And so we all had to start unplugging stuff and turning off the lights so that everyone had, enough energy to actually keep the lights on. If everyone was using energy at their normal capacity, things would have started failing. So that is a good point by Tristan. This is not a problem just of the bans, it's a problem of the whole concept of EVs in general. Tristan Hoper says, at the precise moment that the government is turning everything under its purview to S, they're demanding unprecedented control over housing and transportation. At the electrification quotas the federal government is demanding, they should be green lighting a new hydro dam or nuclear plant basically every month. But they're not. The plan, as it stands, is for millions of subsidized cars nobody can drive unless they're Teslas or Chinese made or whatever other kind of EVs the government decided you shouldn't have. I say this as someone whose dream car remains the IMEIV. So yeah, some electric vehicle. And I even mentioned, and this is the whole freedom to choose element of all this, know what car you should be able to drive? The car you want to drive. not subsidized, not with a big tax credit. Whatever car that you, in your financial position and where you live, would dictate that you should get, you should go get that one. And with energy sources, do you know what energy I'm in favor of? I'm in favor of electricity. I'm in favor of natural gas. I'm in favor of gasoline. I'm in favor of coal. I'm in favor of wood. Use whatever you want to use. You have the freedom to choose. In fact, do you know what's actually reduced emissions over time more than anything else? No government mandates, no scolding remarks from the United Nations. It's been capitalism, because capitalism enables people, or basically empowers people, to try and get the most value, the most stuff for the least amount of money. And that means that people over time have bought cars that use the same size fuel tank to go farther. And so emissions have been going down over time. And you know what then happened? Well, the liberals implement the carbon tax, and they do other sorts of environmental regulations, bans, coal phase outs. And then they're like, look, emissions have gone down since we did that. And you look at the overall like timeline of the chart, and in fact, it was going down at a rapid speed. And then when the government started getting involved, things actually slowed down more, because higher taxes and higher regulations means that people have stayed using higher emission vehicles, because everything costs so much you can't buy the more efficient truck anymore. You have to wait far longer before you upgrade from what you bought in 2005 to a newer model, and you're probably going to have to buy something used, where if everything was much cheaper, you actually might buy a new vehicle right now that has 60% of the emissions of your last vehicle. But of course, government got in the way. This is like what happened in the United States. Again, it's interesting that I was talking about Milton Friedman, because here's an example he used a lot. In the United States, when Ralph Nader was going after, was it like the Ford Pinto, or was like some older car for being dangerous, they found out that by then putting in a bunch of restriction safety regulations to mandate seat belts and in like a driver side and passenger side airbags and other things on the car, like bumpers that crumpled in to avoid, fatalities. By implementing all that stuff, all these safety features that we take for granted today as standard, at the time they were expensive to implement. So what happened was, people, because of the regulations that Ralph Nader had championed, people drove around their T-Birds longer. People drove around the dangerous vehicles causing deaths longer, because to buy the newer, more safer vehicle, it went from something that was obtainable within a couple of years to something that you couldn't do for 7 years, because taxes and regulations pumped up the price of those cars to purchase. That's the problem. That when you try and get people to do what you consider to be the right thing, oftentimes you make it more difficult to do the right thing, rather than, so if your goal is to lower emissions, let people buy more efficient, cheaper vehicles. Don't make them buy the EV. One, there's the power grid problems, but then there's also the fact that EVs cost more than maybe buying a used car that has a more fuel efficient engine than what the person's been driving around since 2002. But maybe I'm just being simplistic. Anyways, that should be it for me today, guys, at least in this video. I'm actually, when you're watching this, on a kind of mini vacation. And so a lot of the stuff I've been pre-filming, but it's actually great. So much has been going on. I've been having a lot of topics to discuss. I probably have another thing I need to film today, too. I basically filmed 4 things today. So, that's how the sausage is made sometimes when it comes to YouTube. I didn't want to have to haul all my equipment with me where I was going. But tons of big issues going on in Parliament today, all coming to a close tomorrow, which is all very hypocritical. Apparently, we needed to get a bunch of stuff done in Parliament, but now Mark Carney wants us all to go on a 3-month vacation, even though he's the man with the plan and we're in a crisis. Whatever. Okay. Well, that's it for me today, guys. Like, share, subscribe, do all that great stuff. See you guys later.